What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm actually going to be combining my running back and wide receiver rankings for week 12. I just thought that with the three Thursday night games or three Thursday games, people are probably going to be getting to this one earlier. Just want to have all the information in one spot. So top 36 running backs, top 36 wide receivers, all in this single video. Let's just dive right into the running backs. As always, splitting these players up into tiers, starting off with tier 1. Got to be the consensus running back 1. This is just going to be Christian McCaffrey's tier. Don't think we need a huge explanation there. Then looking at tier 2, going to have a few guys: Travis Etienne, Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift, Jahmyr Gibbs, and David Montgomery. Travis Etienne with a couple down games. He's going up against the Texans here. I think this is a nice opportunity to bounce back after two weird game scripts kind of on each side of it over the past 2 weeks. Then we have Austin Eckler. Ravens matchup is tough, but the Chargers are going to feed this dude touches on the ground and through the air. Then we have DeAndre Swift. Pretty much ever since week 1, he's been a very strong fantasy option with a decent matchup here against the Bills. And then back-to-back Lions running backs. Kind of crazy to have two running backs in my top 6. But just looking at the way this game is probably going to go, I feel like the Lions are going to go ahead. The Packers are, very banged up all across the board. Lions really have no injuries this week. I think this is going to be a really nice game script for these two running backs, and I think they're going to put up some big fantasy points. Now, tier 3 is going to be very large, and with no bye weeks, it does make the running back position seem decently strong at this point. So we're going to start off with Jonathan Taylor. Not a great matchup here against the Buccaneers, but really in any matchup, if Jonathan Taylor's getting a lot of touches, I feel confident playing him. Then we have Breece Hall. He continues to overcome his situation with solid fantasy production. I don't see why that changes. In the same matchup here, I have Raheem Mostert. Now, these rankings are going to be assuming that Achane is not playing. At the time I'm recording this, it doesn't seem like he has a great shot. Maybe he does end up playing, which would hurt Mostert a little bit. But right now, this is assuming no Achane. And then behind Mostert, we have Rachaad White. He's been on a tear pretty much over the last 5 games, I think. Had a tough matchup last week. Still came away with nice fantasy production. He has a much softer matchup this week against the Colts. So I like Rachaad White as a top 10 running back. Then we have Josh Jacobs. Not going to be on a top offense, but they are going to continue to force feed Josh Jacobs the ball. Tony Pollard, I like the matchup for Pollard here. I think the Cowboys are going to put up some points. Had a nice bounce back in week 11. Finally got into the end zone for the first time in a while. So I like Pollard there. Then we have Saquon Barkley. Not a terrible matchup. Probably going to be one of the Giants' only competitive games rest of season. So we saw he could overcome the bad situation last week. I think he'll be a fine, fringe running back 1. Then I'm going to have back-to-back running backs in the same game. We're going to go Bijan Robinson and Alvin Kamara. Now, both these guys are drawing tough matchups in this one. For Bijan Robinson, I'd like to see him get a little bit of a bump in his usage out of the bye. If he does, I think he could be a mid to high-end running back 1 rest of season, but we got to see it first. Then for Alvin Kamara, I think he's at risk of his workload getting minimized a little bit from guys like Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller. We saw them start to do it prior to the bye week, so we'll see with Alvin Kamara there. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Derrick Henry, and he actually has a really nice matchup here, so I could understand an argument for him being higher. I just think he has a much lower weekly floor than some of these other running backs ranked ahead of him. Now, looking at my tier 4, this is pretty much going to be our mid-tier RB2s. We're going to start off with Isaiah Pacheco. Really nice matchup here. Has a somewhat limited role, but this does seem like one of those spots where you feel pretty comfortable playing Isaiah Pacheco. Then I'm going to have Kyren Williams. Kind of a weird player to rank because we don't know if he's going to step right back into that workhorse role. If he was getting the role he has prior to the him going on IR, he'd probably be a running back 1 in this nice matchup against the Cardinals. I think the Rams getting rid of Henderson is probably a solid sign because him and Freeman were in a solid split. So I would expect him to have a nice workload moving forward. I just don't know if it's going to be 100% in his first week back. Then we have Zach Charbonnet. I am very confident that Charbonnet is going to have a nice workload, assuming that Kenneth Walker does not play, which it doesn't seem like he's going to. He is doubtful. Tough matchup, but I think the workload can kind of carry Charbonnet here. And then for Brian Robinson, another player who, has some injuries in his backfield. I'm going to feel a lot more confident about Brian Robinson if Antonio Gibson is out. I just think it makes him way more reliable depending on where the game script goes, right? If they're going ahead, Brian Robinson will be fine, but if they're trailing in this game, no Antonio Gibson would be big for B-Rob in terms of his receiving usage. And then we have Gus Edwards. Great touchdown upside as of late, and then a nice matchup against the Chargers. Now looking at tier 5, these are 3, solid RB2s on rougher offenses. Starting off with James Conner, we saw him see an uptick in receiving usage last week. Hopefully that carries over here into week 12. Ramondre Stevenson with a decent matchup here against the Giants, but still in somewhat of a split with Zeke. And then Joe Mixon. I just think this Bengals offense is going to be rough. Mixon has had the workload. He had it early on in the season, but was still not super efficient, limited touchdowns without a healthy Joe Burrow. I feel like the offense is probably going to be pretty similar to what we were seeing earlier on in the season. Now, looking at tier 6, I'm going to start off this tier with Jaylen Warren, and I think the change in offensive coordinator can only be a plus for Warren moving forward. He's been a great fantasy option over the last few weeks, and it'll be interesting to see if he sees a bump in usage here going up against the Bengals. Then we're going to have A.J. Dillon going up against the Lions. Aaron Jones out for this one, so it might be a tough matchup. Game script may not be great, but I still think he'll be leading touches here. Then we have Javonte Williams, and I would have hoped to be ranking him higher. He just had some pretty concerning usage last week against the Vikings. Also a tough matchup here against the Browns, but his receiving involvement was pretty much non-existent. I believe he only ran 5 routes. If you're getting an early down grinder on an offense that's not top tier, going up against one of the better defenses in the NFL, I don't feel great about it. And then for Jerome Ford here, I could see an argument maybe for him being higher, but if we look at the split last week with Kareem Hunt, it was very, very close. And this is not a Browns offense I'm super high on moving forward with no Deshaun Watson, so I think both those guys have concerns. Then for James Cook, draws a really tough matchup here against the Eagles. We'll see what this split looks like in his second week with the new OC. And then wrapping up this tier with Devin Singletary. And this is Devin Singletary if Dameon Pierce plays. If Dameon Pierce is out for this game, I mean, Devin Singletary is like at lowest tier 4. I could even see a tier 3 argument for him. Very impressive over the past couple of weeks with no Dameon Pierce. And then tier 7, all guys in somewhat ambiguous backfields: Alexander Mattison, Najee Harris, Khalil Herbert, Ty Chandler, Keaton Mitchell, and Jeff Wilson. For Madison Chandler, I'd expect Madison to still lead this backfield, but could be up in the air. Khalil Herbert, he would be higher if we knew Deonta Foreman was out. If Foreman's healthy, I think it's probably going to be a pretty gross split. Keaton Mitchell could be his breakout game with a nice matchup against the Chargers. And then if Achane is out, Jeff Wilson would be the RB2 now that I believe Ahmed got put on IR. So those are going to be the top 36 running backs. Now pivoting over to the wide receiver position, starting off in tier 1, wouldn't get too caught up with the order of these guys. All of them are in your lineup. So CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Keenan Allen, and then Justin Jefferson. I'd probably lean towards Jefferson not playing this week, but I did just want to throw him in here, in case he was able to give it a go. If Jefferson's playing, I'm firing him up. Now, we also have a pretty large tier 2 here. Going to start it off with Jamar Chase. I'm not full-blown panicking on Chase, even with the injury to Joe Burrow. I think his ceiling is definitely lower, but I also feel like they're just going to pepper him with targets. Like we saw earlier on in the season, T. Higgins was the guy who kind of took the hit when Joe Burrow was hurt. So I think Jamar Chase will be fine as a wide receiver 1. Then we have DJ Moore here. Great bounce back game with Justin Fields back at quarterback. Those two together have been very, very impressive. Mike Evans continues to produce. Decent matchup here against the Colts. Brandon Ayuk continues to ball out, performing like the top wide receiver here for the 49ers. Then we have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back-to-back going up against the Cardinals. Both these guys are banged up right now, so we'll see if they can give it a go on Sunday. Then we're going to go with Michael Pittman in a nice matchup here against the Buccaneers. Very high weekly floor. Just been a super consistent option for you. Devontae Adams going up against the Chiefs. Since the head coaching change, Devontae Adams has been much more involved. They clearly want to focus on feeding Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs. Then we have Tank Dell here at wide receiver 16. If you want to put him higher, I get it. He has been on an absolute tear. Crazy impressive rookie season here for Tank. And then wrapping up this tier with Chris Olave, it seems like we might get Derek Carr this week. If it is Carr, maybe you bump him to tier 3. Personally, for Chris Olave fantasy-wise, I'd prefer to see Jameis out there just launching it deep to him all game long, giving him 50-50 balls, but we may not be getting that. Now, tier 3, pretty much going to be your mid to back end wide receiver 2s. Going to start it off with Adam Thielen. He's cooled off a little bit, but is still commanding really solid volume. Devonta Smith coming off the big game. Think he's a nice wide receiver 2 play. Nico Collins, even in a big Tank Dell game, also had a solid performance, commanding a lot of volume. Still like him. Garrett Wilson, coming off his first down game in the while. The volume is still there. We have a quarterback change. We'll see how it shakes out. I still think he's going to be targeted pretty heavily moving forward. Then back-to-back Seahawks wide receivers. I know Metcalf had the big game last week, but they've been neck and neck pretty much all season long. Not a terrible matchup here against this 49ers defense, so I like them to round out this tier. Then looking at tier 4, only 3 guys here: Jalen Waddle, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, all players in unique situations. Jalen Waddle has been disappointing this season, also draws a tough matchup here against the Jets. I still think he can turn it around, but definitely been rough start to the season. Then we have Jordan Addison. I think we'd probably put Addison in tier 3 if Jefferson doesn't play. Not a great game last week, but a tough matchup against Surtain with no Jefferson. And then I think Zay Flowers is going to take a huge step forward with Mark Andrews going down. Also like the matchup here against this Bears secondary. Then tier 5, just going to be the rest of these wide receivers. All players in kind of unique spots. Some of them on a little bit of a skid here. Going to go Calvin Ridley. I may be buying back in on Ridley. His splits with Zay Jones in the lineup have been very impressive, so maybe he keeps that rolling. Then we're going to go Deebo Samuel, struggling but still very talented. Christian Kirk, his splits with Zay Jones also in the lineup have not been great. It's definitely favored Calvin Ridley. Then we're going to go Deontay Johnson. Hopefully the change in OC kind of helps this team out. Then we've got Marquise Brown with 2 rough games in a row, but personally I'm still a believer in him and Kyler. Kind of putting it together rest of season. Then we have Terry, a couple down games in a row, also draws a tough matchup here against the Cowboys, but still a very, very talented wide receiver. Then we're going to go with D-Hop. Had the big touchdown last week, had the huge game a few weeks ago with Will Levis, just not a super high weekly floor. The Panthers have also been pretty tough against opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers. Then I'm going to go Josh Downs. Seems to kind of have been forgotten a little bit. When this dude was healthy, he was putting together a bunch of strong performances in a row. I also like the matchup here against this Bucs secondary. I talked about it with Jamar Chase. I think T. Higgins is the guy who takes the biggest hit with the Joe Burrow injury, so kind of low on him. And then Courtland Sutton here wrapping up these rankings. I understand if you want him higher. He consistently is getting into the end zone. I just don't know how this Broncos offense is going to look going up against that really tough Cleveland Browns defense. But that's going to wrap it up for the top 36 running backs and wide receivers. Hopefully you guys are able to set your lineups, feel good about your teams here heading into the Thanksgiving games. If you guys do celebrate Thanksgiving, hope you have a good time hanging out with your family and friends. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. Thank you all, and I will see you in the next one.